This video is sponsored by SmallRig. Good morning and welcome to a new episode. Raise your hand if you've ever struggled with taking quality photos in low light. I have, and that's why we're making this video right now. Low light or bad light photography is one of the hardest things to manage for mainly technical reasons. So in this video, I will cover why it is so hard, and I will share techniques and tools that you can use to nail your low light photography. And make sure you to watch until the end because I will share a quick hack to fix noisy photos without losing sharpness, which can happen very often. Now let's get started. Alright, close your eyes. Imagine that small street with maybe a little bit of smoke, some lights, a little shop, and you want to capture that ambience. And you try, maybe your photos are too grainy, too noisy, the colors are dull. You're not sure what is happening. This has happened to me many times. And low light photography is a really tricky one. So I want to see with you first, what are the challenges and then what are the solutions? If you don't know me, my name is Piety Lambert. I'm a travel photographer, the creator of the 30-day program to great photo, a step-by-step method for training your photographer's eyes and your skills so that you can take photos you love no matter what kind of gear you're using. I also share free tutorials on this YouTube channel, so make sure you subscribe, and exclusive content on the Patreon community, which you can check out after. So the real challenge with low light photography is that photography is all about capturing light. And the less light we have, the harder we have to work to see it in a way. So cameras get pushed to their edges mainly because of our ISO. The ISO number represents the gain, how much we're gonna amplify the light or sensor receive. As a rule of thumb, the lower the ISO, the better the quality of the image is going to be. And the higher it gets, the more noise, less dynamic range, and muted colors we have. So, in theory, we want to keep it as low as possible, let's say ISO 100. Well, why don't we do that? Well, if you remember, our camera has two parameters that impacts how much light is received in camera: the aperture and the shutter speed. The higher the aperture, the f-stop number that you may read on your camera, the less light enters the camera as we have a smaller diaphragm in the lens. The higher the shutter speed, the less light the sensor receives because the shutter goes up and down faster. I have a specific videos covering those in details that you can watch after. So if you think about it, the less light, the smaller you want your aperture to be. Let's say, for example, f1.8, and the slower you want your shutter speed to be. So let's say 1 second. Would those parameters work? Yes, but the problem is that with parameters like that, all your handheld shots or with moving objects will be blurry, and this may not be what you want. So we have two approaches to kind of counter this issue. The first one is going to bump up parameters in camera to compensate for the less light we have, and the second one will be simply to modify our environment a little bit to help us. I know it's a little tricky, but you'll see it can yield great results. So why don't we start with that one? Let's add light on the field. The go-to idea is simply to bring lights on the field to light up the scene and the subject you want. It can be done in many ways, so I will share with you this example of a shoot I did with Joey and his new Canyon bike. He's super excited about cycling lately and wanted to take shots for this new bike. So we wanted to get a bit of Chicago in the background in the shot around blue hour. The problem is that there is almost no light lighting up the bike. If we had decided to take the photos without changing the environment, we would have had to do long exposures or crank up the ISO, and Joey would not separate from the background at all. The bike would look dull, and with a high ISO, we most likely would have very noisy images. So instead, I grabbed a few lights from SmallRig, the sponsor of this video. I got two handheld light tubes RT25 and a magnetic smart light, the RM75. I'll put the link in the description. SmallRig also makes camera cages and other helpful accessories like photo and video tripods, the one I'm using right now. One tube was the main source of white light. I set it around 4500 Kelvin, and I tried to make it look natural, as if it was coming from the side of a building, like a little open door on that corner. So that's for the first light. And then I wanted to spice up things a little bit with the colors. The second tube was to add fun colors in the shot for creative purpose. I was trying to add a little bit of funkiness in it. Joey is someone who's really fun, so why not? So I asked Joey to hold in his hand the small light, and I matched the temperature on a tube. Now for the little joke, I actually did not charge properly one of the light tubes, but luckily we also had a portable battery power station, and so I could just simply plug in the tube on the field. This is cool. The power station we use is the Anker Solid C300 DC, okay? And I'll link it in the description also if you're curious. And I'm shooting with a 50mm lens in order to have my background close enough to Joey, the background with the towers of Chicago. I wanted them to be able to be in the shot close to Joey, but not too close as if I was at 200mm. And if I had shot this wide at 20mm and I tried, they would completely disappear. They would be way too small. So 50mm for me was a good balance. But here's a little quick tip / warning. If you're using light and somehow your background goes all dark, meaning you can't see anymore the city or whatever is behind, try to lower the intensity of the light on your subject until you start seeing what is behind. You see, if it's too bright, then your camera's gonna expose for the face, or you're gonna expose for the face, and everything behind is gonna be dark. So if you're able to lower it, actually make it a little less bright, you will get better results. This is literally what we had to do with Joey on the field. I tweaked the light many times in order to get an intensity that will allow for some ambience in the photo while having my subject properly lit up. And this is the same thing that happens in studios like that. Honestly, sometimes the best way to get around a problem, for example low light, is simply to remove it. But there are times where you cannot remove the problem, so what should we do? Well, second solution is going to be to work with your environment. Seek places in your environment with light naturally available. For example, a street shop, window light, a lamp pole, etc., a vending machine, and use them to your advantage. I had to constantly adjust when I'm doing street photography. I'm observing around me to see what I can use at night in order to light up subjects. And you'd be surprised by the fact that when your subject is well lit, you don't even need to push your settings to uncomfortable edges. Extremely simple tip, but it requires training your eye to be able to observe all this. Now, if you find this helpful so far, leave it a big like and let me know in the comments what you would like to see in a future video. Now, the third solution is going to be using lenses with a wider aperture. You see, I haven't really touched on our camera nor the lenses yet. As I mentioned, an easy way to get around lower light, less light, is to help your camera receive more of it. So lenses with a wide aperture, for example f1.4, f1.8, f2.8, are extremely helpful in night situation. When you shoot at a small f-stop, your depth of field is minimal, which creates background blurring, the bokeh, and you get more light in camera. For example, in my hand right now, I have a 50mm f1.2. You may be thinking, oh, this is great. Why don't everyone gets a 50mm f1.2? Well, one of the biggest issue is that it is extremely pricey, okay? The smaller the f-stop can go on a lens, and usually the more expensive it is. So look on the used market if you're on a budget. Personally, when I got started getting really into photography, I got a 50mm f1.8, which changed everything and how I would see things, especially in low light. I was blown away by the results without changing my camera, and it cost me maybe $120 at the time. So remember, change for a wider aperture lens before you ever consider changing camera body. It will be a lot more impactful. Remember your exposure triangle. You have also another option if you can't change too much your aperture, or if you're capped at f4. And that leads us to solution number 4, reducing the shutter speed. Now this option will impact your creative outcome heavily. So the longer exposures, the more motion objects will be blurry. So you want to use it with that in mind. Long exposures are awesome for astrophotography or light trail photos. I do long exposure photography all the time when I want to see the stars in my photos. If I see the Milky Way or anything, I go on my tripod and I take long exposure photographies. We're talking 10 seconds, 15 seconds, 30 seconds, and we get results like this. Now, I have a night photography cheat sheet completely free for you with a recap of ideas and settings you can use. The link is in the description. You can grab it for free. So here are a few tips. When you're doing long exposures, try to use a tripod to be very stable. Any motion in your camera when you're taking the photo will make your image blurry. And if you're like me and you hate carrying tripods, except maybe for astrophotography and recording videos like now, you can turn on your camera sensor stabilization if it's available and try to hold your camera close to your body. You exhale slowly and then you take photos in slow bursts until you nail one. Like this, I've been able to do a 3.2 second exposure sharp handheld on the Sony a7R V just for fun to test it. So it's not impossible. It's not something I would rely on heavily, but honestly, I go comfortably down to 1 second on my cameras, the A1, the A7CR and such, to actually do handheld photos, but again, I need to use the burst mode. Now, last but not least, number 5 is reduce the noise in post-production, okay? It simply means going to your editing software and trying to denoise the image. There are many tools available for that, but most of the editing software, Luminar Neo, Lightroom, Capture One will do it in the software and you can do it. But the problem is that usually your photos start to get a little soft and you're losing sharpness. So I have a special bonus technique for you in order to correct that, and I've been using that for years. It's been so helpful. So on Lightroom or your favorite software, in the denoise area, slide your luminosity slider to a value you like for the big, darker areas where there usually is a lot of noise, until you can see almost no noise or it looks smooth. Now make sure you don't do it too much so your image is not smooshed out, and not too little that you don't see any result. Then go to the sharpening area. You'll see it's a little counterintuitive, but we're gonna increase the sharpness until our subject looks sharp again. Now the problem is that it affected the whole area. So we're gonna go in masking, and then while maintaining the Option or Alt key on your keyboard, if you're using Lightroom, you will see the white areas are the areas that are affected by the masking, and the black ones are the ones that are not affected. So what you want to do is basically to add sharpening to the edges, the contours of all objects in your image that are sharp, that you want to be sharp, and leave the rest in black, meaning not affected by the sharpening. This will allow you to have a smooth sky but a sharp subject. So to keep it simple, bring lights on the field as your main option. Honestly, it's gonna change creatively how you're gonna shoot. It's gonna make it easier and more fun. SmallRig has a lot of options available. You can grab one of these if you want. There's a link in the description. And if you cannot throw in any lights in your backpack, well then that's when you start to observe where you are and use environmental lights in order to enhance your subject, okay? And if nothing is available, then you start working with your camera settings to crank up everything possible. You can move to a long exposure, you can use wide apertures, there's a lot you can do. And if you end up with noisy photos, you can always fix it in post. Now, if you want more tips, watch this video on night street photography. And if you want to really nail your autofocus to get sharp images, watch this video. And remember, get out there, go shoot, try something different, try something new. I will see you in the next one. Have a beautiful day. Bye.